Hey guys, Solomon here. I hope you're having a great day. Today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the modern defense, a very strong system for black against the move of e4. And first off, the modern defense is simply strong, right? There's a lot of different things that you can branch into out of the modern defense. I mean, first off, you can just go with a standard modern defense most of the time, but you could also go into a Pirc, a Hippo, a Pterodactyl, a King's Indian Defense, a Norwegian Defense, a Norwegian Gambit. There's so many different ways that you can go about it. It's very flexible, and you can kind of decide what you like depending on what your opponent plays. Now, the move here starts out with g6. Now, on top of it being sound, it's rare, right? I mean, the two moves that stand out to me, I played e4 for 6 or 7 years. The two moves that I saw all the time were c5 with the Sicilian defense and e5, and it has not changed to this day. These are still the two most popular moves. You may also see moves like, the c6 with the CARO-KANN. You might see the Pirc. You might see, a lot of different kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the move of g6 just isn't seen that much. So on top of it being very strong, you're going to have the advantage in preparation, which goes quite a long way. Now we're going to be looking at this move of d4. Now most modern defense players fianchetto the bishop to g7, and we're going to be looking at that. In this video, I'm showing you the modern defense, and I'm showing you all the different ways that you can take it, right? Try these out, plug them into Stockfish, try them against friends, play them online, study them, see which one of these you like the most, and go from there. Okay, but we're first going to be looking at this move of knight f6 with the Norwegian defense. I highly recommend that you look into this in detail, and I'm actually thinking about making a series on this move. Let me know if you think I should, if you'd be interested in that. But yeah, I mean, this is a very strong move. Okay, with very great results online, very strong results coming out of this position for black online. Okay, especially when we play it correctly. Now, if white wants to play a move like knight c3, we're going to strike in the center of the board with a move like d5. If they then push, knight e4 is great. In this instance, if they play e5, we're not playing knight e4 right now because first off, it's not supported by a pawn and there's not a knight on c3. And on top of that, the knight's just going to get trapped. So instead, what we're going to do here is we're actually going to bring our knight to the edge of the board to h5. Oftentimes, white will play bishop e2. And there's one thing I want to note here, guys, okay? I mean, if you just got into chess, right, or if you've been playing chess for a long time, doesn't really matter. You've probably heard of the whole saying, control the center of the board. I've said that, right? A lot of high-level players say control the center of the board. That said, once you get into more of an intermediate advanced level, you start to realize that there are certain openings that are very strong, which actually give the opponent the center, but then you start chipping away at that center for the rest of the game. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're allowing white to push their pawns like crazy, but we're going to start chipping right now. We don't even care that they're attacking this knight. We're playing d6. We are immediately putting pressure on this overextended pawn. There's a few moves we're going to look at here, but let's just start out by answering the question: why can't white just win a pawn here? Why isn't this crushing for white? Well, we're going to take on e5. Okay. If you see a move like pawn takes, queen d5 is a solid option there, attacking the pawn on g2. If queen captures back, we can play a move like rook g8, yet again, going for the g2 pawn. Notice there's no light squared bishop anymore. So yeah, I mean, you got to move the pawn or you got to try to defend it. If you move the pawn, though, we have this move of knight c6. With tempo against the queen, we're going to throw our queen into d4. And okay, I mean, we evened out the material, but we're now threatening to take on c2 and win that rook. And if you defend it with a move like knight a3, we play b6. We're about to fianchetto our second bishop, attacking that rook. And yeah, I mean, we have the advantage in activity and space and development, pressure on the opponent, all that kind of stuff. Fantastic position for black to work with. Okay, very awkward position for white to have to deal with. Okay, so that's one thing. I mean, if you move the pawn, knight c6, we're going to get our pawn right back. We have way more pieces developed than you do, and they're still flying in like there's no tomorrow. So what about a move like queen e4? White here defending with the queen, and there's obviously no tempo now with knight c6. Well, we can play knight d7, swing our knight over to f6, and this is kind of a rare exception to the rule of never trade down if you're down material, right? Usually if we're down material, we want to keep everything on the board. In this case, a move like queen d5 is very sound, offering a trade. And notice here, we're down a pawn, but we have some nice development. Okay, we're attacking this knight. We're castling queenside now. White currently has 1, 2, 3 pieces developed. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a rook aiming directly at the opponent's king. The computer here has a slight advantage for white, very slight. I mean, I'm talking like 0.1, 0.01, like 0.1 level. Okay, very small. But we're down a pawn, so that shows us that we have a lot of compensation for our pawn to give us around an even evaluation. All right. So that's just a start. If you see, bishop e2, we play d6. If you want to take the knight, that's fine. Right? We're going to let you keep taking. Then we're going to take on e5. We're going to put our rook on g8. We're going to bring our knight out, queen out, put the pressure on you. Fun game for black there. Now let's move g4. I love this for black because we're actually bringing our knight to g7. Now this might seem very passive, and I will admit it does take a level of accuracy going from this point for black, but it really comes down to the next move. Let's say white here plays a move like f4, continuing to push like crazy. Sometimes, guys, pushing pawns isn't always the best. The more you push, the weaker your position gets. We now play this move of h5, attacking white's overextended pawn chain. If you take, if you defend, no matter what you do at some point, f5 is going to be a weakness. It's going to be a hole. By hole, I mean a square that cannot be attacked by white for the rest of the game. In this case, we can just throw that knight right in, and fantastic position for black to work with here. I mean, we're going to look to fianchetto our bishop and move like c5, putting pressure on the center, casting kingside on the way. If I'm playing white here, if I am playing white, I don't like this. There's just no way. I don't like it, right? I mean, there's, it's just tough. It's tough. It's tough for white to have to deal with this. Okay, I mean, our pawns are so far extended. This knight is very comfortable on f5. And it's also defended by a light square bishop. So even if you do get rid of it, guess what? We have a pretty good piece filling it in. And yeah, where does white go from here? I don't really know, in all honesty. Okay. Now we go back to the move d6. What happens if white takes on d6? I want to mention that queen takes d6 is an option. This is an option that you can play. I mean, if white wants to go for that, you know, that pawn there, that's fine. We could take on d4. A move like knight c6 is also pretty strong because if c3, we're going to play rook g8 and try to prone white into playing g3. Right? Try to get them to play g3. Now we have knight takes d4 though. And in fact, if you like this line, I encourage you to memorize it. Knight takes d4, pawn takes. Now, when I first saw this, I was thinking like, that's interesting. Like, is this an F compensation? It doesn't look like it, but it turns out we're not taking the pawn. We're playing queen c6. Absolutely disgusting variation for black, attacking the rook, attacking the bishop. You can't save both. If you save the rook, we take the bishop, we win this pawn. We're up a pawn here. We have more development. We have two bishops. You have two knights. Yeah, this is just not good for white. Okay, so queen takes d6 is an option. C takes d6 is also an option. In this case, if the bishop takes, guess what? We're going to check and swing all the way over to take that bishop right off the board. We do get double isolated pawns here, but in return, we get a very active g-file, a move like bishop f5. These moves are very common in online chess from white. We're attacking this pawn on c2. And sure, I mean, we got some issues here in terms of pawn structure, but at the end of the day, at least right now, I mean, this is pretty hard in this position for white to attack that pawn. This knight is 2 squares diagonal of the pawn, which means that it's 4 moves away from getting there. And we have the bishop here, and we're attacking c2. We're going to keep putting the pressure on white and make a game out of this. Slight advantage to black. Okay, so I just wanted to mention this move of knight f6, okay, with the Norwegian defense. And yeah, if you see a move like e5, you can play knight h5. Let me know if you want to see more content on that option. Okay, but back to d4. Let's now look at the fianchetto with the move of bishop g7. Now, in this case, white will usually play a move like knight f3, right? We're going to look at, other options as well, like knight c3. We're going to be looking at 3 pawn center with f4, 3 pawn center with c4, and the different options that black has. Now, with knight f3, there's really 2 moves that I see. Okay, there's 2 moves that I see black play quite a bit. Concerning d6, that's one option that we're going to look at. c5 is also an option. On top of that, c6, okay, really there's 3. c6 is also a very viable option here because we're prepping this d5 push. Okay, more on that idea later. But yeah, I mean, c6, trying to look to d5, that's also a very solid idea that you can go with here coming out of the modern. Okay, but we're going to really be looking at this move of d6 to start. Let's say white plays a move like knight c3. First off, look, you can play the move of e6, and guess what? You are going into a hippopotamus defense structure. If you want to play the hippo, this is a great way to do it. If you want to go into the Pirc defense, right? Some call it the Pirc, some call it the Pirc. If you want to go into the Pirc defense with knight f6, there you go. You're playing a Pirc, right? If you like this variation of the Pirc, then play the Pirc. If you see something else from white you don't like playing the Pirc, then okay, play the hippo, play whatever else. You can also just go into kind of a standard modern, okay, 2 knights variation here with knight d7, prepping e5. And it's kind of surprising to me. I mean, really here, white, white has some moves here. They should think about h4. They can think about queen d2. They can think about taking, but it's shocking to me just how much, right? Look at lead chess, look online, you'll see it. How often white plays d5. This now reminds me of a hippo / King's Indian defense type structure, okay? We're playing knight e7, you know, bring the pawn to h6, and here you can castle, take a little bit of a slower approach before playing f5, or just play f5 now. And I absolutely love this game for black. I've got positions like this before with the hippo, and I can't say enough about it, okay? White here, sure, they got some advanced pawns, but who cares? They ain't going nowhere. We have a flank pawn putting pressure on white's weak pawn, because notice, between these two pawns, the backwards one is going to be weak, right? And we're putting some pressure on it. We're going to fill our knight in, not to e6, obviously, to f6, putting more pressure on that pawn. And we're going to be looking to advance our pawns as well. I mean, if you play a move like queen d2 or something, guess what? Your bishop's trapped. Right? And I've had games too where, I mean, just the other day, right? You play f4, you kick the bishop back, you play g5, you start filling these knights and you gain a ton of space, you get some great attacking chances. I love this game for black, okay? So, all right, I mean, that's one option. You can play a move like d6, and then from there, go into a Pirc, go into a hippo, all that kind of good stuff, go into a regular modern defense. And a lot of them have overlapping ideas, which is kind of cool. There's also this move c5, okay? And this is kind of interesting. This is, you know, all of a sudden kind of a pterodactyl type setup. You see some resemblance of the Sicilian defense, the dragon, the hyper-accelerated dragon. There's a lot going on here. But okay, what does white do here? I mean, if they take, right, we throw in a check. Okay, you're up a pawn, but not for long. I mean, I'm literally about to take it right back. I'm going to drop back to c7. From this point, we can develop the knight to f6, maybe look at knight g4, harassing that bishop, develop this knight, develop quickly. Black's totally okay here. And notice, white does have a pawn in the center, but they only have one central pawn on the E and D files. That's it. We have two pawns on the E and the D files, which is nice for us, and a very nice long pawn chain, right? White here has a 4 and a 3, a 4 and a 3 pawn island combo. We have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a 2. And Yasser Serenwan a while back said he'd rather have the very long pawn chain and then a very tiny one than kind of two mid-size islands. Let me know what you think of that down in the comment section below. Okay. Now, what about this move of d5? What happens if white advances? Well, we're throwing our minor piece out right away. We're continuing to put pressure on white's center, right? They're pushing like crazy, and we're inviting white to keep pushing forward. Now, I will say here, according to the engine, white has a slight advantage, not winning, but a slight advantage. But from a practical standpoint, if you know what you're doing here as black, I don't see many white players, you know, surviving this for very long, okay, in terms of keeping the advantage. I mean, even one little slip up like bishop f4 defending this pawn, we play d6, black has the edge. I mean, we're continuing to pour more and more pressure in on that pawn. And if you take, the whole idea here is that we take the pawn on b2, guess what? We're winning a rook. And you do get some pretty crazy positions here. We take the rook, but then white has this very active queen. They have nice development, but we're also castled. We're also up 2 points of material. Absolutely crazy game. But at the end of the day, I would choose black here. Okay, so a lot of fun. And all right, if a move like c3, right, in that case, let's just take the pawn off. Play d5, fight for the center of the board. They get the center, start chipping away at it, keep striking at it. If a move like e5, we play knight c6. And yeah, I mean, from here, I think a move like knight h6 is actually pretty playable, because you're going to be looking at a square like f5 and g4 as well. And yeah, you know, this is a great option that you can really think about working with. So guys, we've looked at so much in this video so far, right? The Norwegian Defense, the Norwegian Gambit. We've looked at the Pirc, how you can get into a hippo pretty easily. We've seen how you can play a modern, a pterodactyl, all these different kind of things. We can also fianchetto our bishop, which leads into a lot of those different systems. What happens here if white plays a move of knight c3 instead of knight f3? Okay, again, the Pirc, the hippo, all that kind of stuff is still available. But there's some fun stuff that can happen here as well, particularly against the move of knight c3. Now, the three moves I see the most, right, include d6, c6, and c5. All right. Now, first off, let's take a look at d6. I mean, this is the standard line. If you see a move like bishop e3, one idea that you can play is a6 and b5. Just start going crazy on the queen side of the board. Play a move like knight d7. Tuck that knight behind. This kind of reminds me of the hippo in a lot of ways, because in the hippo, a main idea is pushing with b5 and following in with knight b6. If a move like g4, you can start to go after this pawn right away. White can push. They have space, but it doesn't really matter that much, because we're in a race right now. We're attacking on the queen side. They're attacking on the king side. And if everything's locked up on the king side, I don't really care how much space you have. If it's locked up, it's locked up. So g5, you know, it doesn't really make the game great for white. And if they take, which is very common online, we just take back with the rook. Just take back with the rook. And, you know, I think it's pretty common here for white to misplay this position quite a bit. Okay, I mean, online h4 is very popular. I don't know why, in all honesty. It's not very good. Like, it's just giving us another target to work with, and more time to play a move like b4. But okay, we play b4. let's say the knight runs back, we can play c5 now. Notice just how aggressively we're playing. The modern defense is not a timid system, okay? It might look slow at the beginning, but it's not slow at all, okay? It's one of those slow buildups that can actually get pretty dangerous. We're putting pressure on this pawn. If they take, we have knight a4, okay? If you take on d6, we have mate in 1. Mate in 1 there, okay? You know, I mean, the computer move here for white, the only move that doesn't give them a losing position actually is bishop d4, but in that case, we can, you know, attack that queen, and the second that bishop drops back, take the bishop, fly the rook in. This is just fun chess. That's what this is, okay? Knight c3, so that's one option, right? Playing a move like d6 and going from there. Playing moves like d6, a6, b5, going crazy on the queen side. You could also play a move like c6 here, right? Preparing this d5 push, which I mentioned earlier in this video. If a move like e5 here, f6 is an option, right? Continuing to chip away at this pawn. If they take here on f6, you can capture back with the knight or the pawn. I personally would probably capture back with the pawn just so that e5 isn't a weak square, but a lot of players take with the knight and they do just fine with this. All right, so that's an option. And if a move like f4, let's play knight h6, right? Let's start looking at squares like f5. Let's start looking at squares like g4, attacking this bishop. Guess what? Their bishop's going to get lost. We're going to go up the bishop pair, and great control of those light squares as well. And finally, the move of c5 is an option. The whole idea here is that if they take, we can capture off that knight. White now has isolated and triple isolated pawns on the c file. If we play a move like queen a5, I mean queen d4, that's the only move that holds on to both of these pawns. In that case, we can play a move like knight f6. You know, here white should play a move like queen b4, and in that case, we can play like, you know, queen c7, drop the queen back. But a move like e5 is pretty common, okay? And this is just a mistake, okay? Our knight's getting overrun. By the way, I mean, queen b4 is not the only move, okay? There's other moves here for white as well, like, you know, bishop d2. In that case, you know, we can think about kicking the queen around. But if white here just goes crazy, pushing down the center of the board, let's get tempo against that queen. What's the only square white can go to defend all three of these pawns? e3, right? That's the only square it can run to defend all of them. But now we have knight g4. Right, and if queen d2 is played, there's a lot of moves here. I think knight g takes is quite a bit of fun. But yeah, I mean, we're at even material now. We have more development. We have 3 pieces developed. They only have 1, and they have triple isolated pawns on the c file. Love it for black. Okay, so all that to say, against knight c3, okay, you have some options. You can play d6. From there, you can go into a hippo. You can go into Pirc. You can also play a6 and b5, kind of a, you know, a standard modern defense kind of thing. And you could also play a move like c6 and d5, and finally you could play c5 here, going into more of a a pterodactyl kind of idea, right? Pterodactyl, you know, just playing c5 and going crazy here, looking to capture off that knight and go from there. Okay, so those are some options available to you. Now, the last thing we're going to cover in this video is what to do against a 3-pawn center. Let's start out with the move of f4. What happens here if white just goes crazy against the modern defense? In which case we fianchetto our bishop. I'm not going to lie. I recommend this move d5. I absolutely love this move for black. Now, first off, if they take the pawn, we capture back with the queen. And notice, these pawns, to me at least, they just feel awkward. If I'm playing white here, I don't know. Just something feels a little off. Maybe it's all the light squares that black has good control over. But yeah, I mean, first off, great control of light squares. We're also putting pressure on d4 by 2 different pieces. The second you defend it, knight h6 is a great move, allowing the bishop to keep putting pressure on d4, having the knight eye key squares like g4 and f5, and allowing our king to castle. And if you kick our queen, okay, we'll go to a5, right? Kind of a Scandi type move there, bringing that queen to that safe square, castling kingside. And yeah, I mean, black has a slightly better position than equality at move 7. I'll take it. If I move like e5, okay, I'll just show you how I play against this. I love playing the move of h5 and knight h6. So this is my recommendation. This isn't the only way you can play it, but I love h5 and knight h6, supporting my bishop coming to the f5 square. And once I get that bishop out, I then play this move of e6. And yeah, I mean, from here we can drop our dark square bishop back. Look, they spent all this time playing e5, supporting it like crazy. Okay, let's move it back and start supporting the c5 push, chipping away at that center and gaining some space on the queen side. And if you ever want to take my bishop, okay, a knight's coming in, right? And I mean, this is just great strategic play from black here. I mean, we have a dark squared bishop, but light squared pawns. And this is important because our bishop doesn't even know the pawns are there. And this allows the bishop to roam around freely. Whereas white's bishop at the moment, it's stuck behind a lot of of pawns on its own color, right? So it's kind of limited in its activity at the moment, whereas our bishop is not, okay? But yeah, I mean, from here, you can play a move like c5. You know, I've played moves like queen b6, you know, continuing to put pressure on white. Sometimes in positions like this, I have a knight on d7. I'll play a6, rook c8, continue, you know, supporting that c pawn. A rook on c8 at some point is always a good idea when you're, you know, really putting pressure on that d pawn with your c pawn. But yeah, I just love this position for black. And let me know what you think of it, right? Let me know what you think of this whole h5, knight h6, bishop f5 idea, and then locking things up with e6. I just feel like we're going to get great pressure on that pawn on d4, and we don't even have a French bishop. The bishop isn't even there. We traded the bishop off for the light squared bishop, which is a great return on our end. And we have one final setup to look at, okay? We looked at knight f3, okay? We looked at knight c3, we looked at f4. Now, if you see the move c4, you can play this move d6, all right? And if you see something like knight c3, we can honestly just play knight f6. That's one option that we have, right? And there you go. We're in a King's Indian defense. If you see f4, c5 is actually a pretty good move here. Okay, c5, putting pressure on white's center like crazy. If they want to take, that's fine. We can play queen a5 with check, snatch that pawn off. White's position is getting way too overextended. And if they push the pawn to d5, let's play f5 now, right? Notice how we're not giving white a breath. And when you take that pawn, we capture back with our bishop. Very interesting position here because on one end, e6 is very weak. Okay, this is a square we need to be careful about. All right, and I'll show you a strategy to get some support on that square. On the other hand, we have two fantastic bishops, especially our bishop on this dark squared diagonal. I mean, you know, the pawns as well doing a great job. We're blasting down the queen side of the board with both of our minor pieces there. And okay, if we move like bishop d3, we can support our bishop. That's fine. We can bring that knight to h6, right? We're one move away from castling kingside if we want to. And another key idea is actually bringing our knight to a6 followed by c7. Okay, this is important because by playing knight a6 and knight c7, you do two things. First off, you support e6 so that, you know, you have more coverage there, which is great. You don't want to ignore that square on e6. And on top of that, I believe by having a knight on c7, you can also look at a move like b5 at some point, right? Because the knight supports that b5 push. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed, you know, the Norwegian defense, the Norwegian Gambit, seeing how you can go into a Pirc, a King's Indian, a Hippo, a Modern, a Pterodactyl. The list goes on. And let me know what you thought of the modern defense, and let me know what type of modern you want to play, right? The modern is kind of a gateway into a lot of different openings, right? You can go with the standard modern, or you can go with something else, right? All those different things are great opening options for black, but they can start with a modern. Let me know what you thought of it down in the comment section below, and let me know if there's any of these lines or variations that you want me to really focus on in this video. I know I mentioned the Norwegian defense, but are there any other openings that start with the modern that you want to see continued? Let me know. Thanks for watching today's video. I wanted to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of January 2023. If you haven't thought about becoming a member yet, I highly encourage you to think about it. You get some exclusive benefits by becoming a member and joining the family. And yeah, it's been quite a bit of fun. We're growing a base here, and I hope to see you there.